Hello, super. Welcome everyone to the session on safer nicotine products. My name is Tomas Hammargren. I'll be the host of this session. It will be, your participation will be crucial because it's really a Q&A we have. With me, I have our panelists.
So switched off for me. Okay.
Ernest Groman from Vienna, Rachel Murkett from England, Karl Fagerstrom, and you are somewhere, Peter Hajek.
Can you raise the volume?
I'm here, but I can hear you very
poorly. Sounds a bit murky.
Okay, now this was better. So to start with, I have one question to each of the panelists, and I've asked them to maybe just recap a little bit.
I hear him very faintly. I almost can't hear him. Camille?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Can you hear me? I can't hear them.
The technicians are working.
Okay.
Yeah, you can continue.
Okay, thank you. For the panelists, I've just asked them to recap a little bit of the highlights from their talk. And actually, I wanted to start with Rachel and your talk on risk continuum. So how important is it where the product fall on the scale, on the risk continuum? I mean, how much lower than cigarettes do they need to be? And do you see a breaking point?
Thank you for the question. So to recap a little bit on my presentation, which was on the nicotine products relative risk assessment, this was a systematic review and analysis study that we conducted in 2020 on 13 nicotine products. We looked at combustible products, several groups of combustibles, and we also looked at newer nicotine products such as e-cigarettes, heated tobacco products, snus, smokeless tobacco, and nicotine replacement therapies and non-tobacco pouches. We analysed data from epidemiological studies, and we looked at lifetime cancer risk based on toxin emissions data as well. We incorporated this into a relative risk hierarchy, which scored each product from 0 to 100 on a combined risk score scale. So the results of this are in the presentation, so please do take a look at that if you'd like to see exactly sort of the breakdown of the products. But we found essentially that you do have a split between the higher risk combustible products and then the lower risk non-combustible products. It's difficult because the score is relatively arbitrary. It's difficult to say exactly where the breaking point should be. We drew that breaking point where you start to have statistically significant decrease in risk based on the combined risk score and the data sets that we had included. But within that reduced risk category, you do also have different levels of risk there. So you have some products that are not significantly more risky than the non-use of any nicotine product. You have some products that sit a little bit higher on that scale. But generally, all of those reduced risk products were significantly less risky to long-term health than the combustible products.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Karl, you talked about oral products on snus and the new modern oral nicotine pouches. And how important is it that the new products are consumer products? And you showed that the new oral products are very close, actually, to the medicinal NRT.
Yes, if I may start by saying that if you look at the composition of the new so-called non-tobacco nicotine pouches, the composition is very similar, very close to many of the nicotine replacement products that are regulated as medicines. And classes of ingredients are actually first a carrier for nicotine, which sometimes is microcrystalline cellulose. You have pH adjusting substances, they are very similar. You have flavors that can be similar and dissimilar, and you have nicotine, of course. And nicotine is the same food grade stuff, 99% plus purity, but the nicotine can be a little, the strength, the content higher in the tobacco industry products. I think there is an advantage for these products to be consumer products, particularly because of what I just said and the implications of their safety. And that is because the consumers themselves, they don't want to feel themselves sick and kind of buy medicines, go to a pharmacy. That is not what they like. Secondly, if they were to need to be regulated, that would be a cost on the developer, the patent holder, of course, which is something that the consumer sooner or later have to pay for. It takes up resources in the medical authorities, assessment units. It would be cheap for the society, I would also say, if these products can work for themselves and bring down the tobacco-related attributable mortality. Then the society doesn't need to put so much money into other efforts. For example, an example of that is Japan, when the heat but not burn products came without any involvement from the medical agencies in Japan or other funding, and they seem to have brought down the cigarette smoking and thereby the harm. So these would be some of my arguments, that they should do well as consumer products.
Thank you, Karl. And Peter, you talked about both e-cigarettes and snus use in pregnancy, showing some promising results. Then, for a smoking pregnant woman, is it important that she starts with medicinal NRT, or should it be just a choice of any type of reduced risk nicotine product?
Yeah, so my talk was about nicotine in pregnancy, and particularly cigarettes, but I also reviewed some other literature concerning snus. And it looks like for these women who smoked at the beginning of pregnancy, switching to an alternative nicotine product does not generate any harm, and the outcome with e-cigarettes was actually better than the outcome with NRT. So e-cigarettes did not, used in late pregnancy, did not generate any other pregnancy complications. In fact, people randomized to e-cigarettes had a lower incidence of low birth weight, babies born under 2.5 kilos, and so it looks like definitely for a pregnant smoker who wants to do something for their child, and if they can't quit unaided, using e-cigarettes would be as good or better, probably more effective, and actually lead to better birth outcomes than the use of NRT. So that was basically the gist of my talk.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. And Ernst, you have a nicotine clinic, or helping smokers to find alternatives. So when a smoker comes to your clinic, what do you recommend? I mean, what type of product? And do you see any safety issues with reduced risk products? And what type of information do you give your patients?
Well, I want to stress that real life is always different from theory, and sometimes also real life punishes theory when you find out that something you have a very good theory does not work in practice. For example, I can remember we always had these quitting plans. Of course, you need a plan. You say quit after week 2 or between week 1 and 2. And I can remember this old lady who coming to my office, and at the second appointment she asked me, "Doctor, are you angry with me? I've already quitted." Because it was assumed that she has to do it after week 2. So, yeah. And the same happens with products now, and it was also a little, for those who did not watch now, it also mentioned a little bit in my presentation, smokers already bring it to our clinic. So, and we also do smoking cessation programs with private companies. And if, for example, e-cigarettes are prevalent in this company, you might have some smokers who already have mixed consumption and asking, yeah, what should I do? And then, what is also interesting, they also communicate with each other, so the information spreads quickly. So if someone is successful with one of these products, suddenly all want these products. Also, you think maybe, or you get the impression maybe it's better we recommend another product for him. But if he's seen his friend quitting with nicotine pouches, for example, he also wants to try nicotine pouches. So it's also a little bit different from traditional medicine. I would say, for example, in oncology, you do not have a big chance to select your medication because, as a patient, because there are few medications available and you simply lack the knowledge. Here, we have the idea to let them choose what they want and support them if their decision is reasonable in one way or another, or if it's not useless, so to say, and we try to correct. But we also try to improve compliance here, because if a patient or client, or however you call him, or smoker, chooses a product himself, the probability that he will continue the use is much bigger than, for example, when he comes to your office and, for example, with nicotine replacement, we have now 70% who tried it before. And if a person has tried nicotine gum before and several times, and you say, no, you have to try it again because it's the best for you, then you will not be successful, I promise. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a number of more questions, but why not engage you as well at this stage? So can I have a question from the floor?
Norbert Schmidt from the German Consumers Organization. I started vaping, and now I'm also experimenting with nicotine pouches after a short turn of snus-like chew bags. And Dr. Fagerstrom, you mentioned in your presentation that you would suggest to limit the amount of available flavors. And this is a point where I, from my experience, would disagree. I found that the vast variety of flavors, first in vaping, and now a growing variety of flavors in nicotine pouches, is pivotal to really finding the right one for individual taste buds. It's I have many flavors. I have tested some flavors that I didn't like at all, while other people are raving.
Right. I think I understand your question. Nothing is simple. This is not a simple thing either. We do need flavors to attract the adult smokers, as you is one of them. But it's not just now about the number of flavors that we might need. It is also probably equally as much as how the packages are perceived and designed that contain different flavors. And I have seen, not necessarily from very serious manufacturers, but I have seen packages that do not really look to be a tobacco product for an adult consumer, but more chewing gum for kids. And I am afraid that if that is allowed and free, there could be something with the nicotine pouches similar to Juul, up very fast, but also down very fast. We have to remember that there is a sensitivity to having too many flavors, mango, chocolate, etc., for the kids. And this is so sensitive for the kids. The anti-tobacco advocates, they don't seem to allow that even if 1 million smokers quit, as long as there is one that never used tobacco and is using the gateway to smoking, we have a big problem, and it's a serious problem. The general public may not be so extreme, but they would also react if we had a shelf with too many flavors, actually. It would stick in the eyes. Tactically, I think that if there are a reasonable number of flavors out there, as there is for NRTs, it will go well. The product will continue. And as it continues, you could add flavors. But if you create the problem right in the beginning, when the product is new on the market, reaction will be different. So, thank you.
Thank you, Karl. Peter, do you have any thoughts on flavors in if it's now e-cigarettes or oral pouches?
Sorry, you asked me.
No, if you have any thoughts on flavors in e-cigarettes and nicotine pouches.
It seems that for smokers to switch to an alternative, there has to be some kind of incentives and compensations, because you're used to something, it's satisfying, you've been using it for a long time, and now you are switching to something else, and there has to be some kind of compensation for the effort. And I think flavors are one such compensation. You may not get all the satisfaction you used to get from smoking, but whether it's pouches or e-cigarettes, you now have some new sensory things, you can try different flavors, and I think it's an important part of it all. In our trials, we typically encourage people to source their own e-cigarettes, and that means primarily to source their own flavors, although it's also sourcing their own strengths of the product, the nicotine content. But I think it's an important part of this swap, that you're getting something pleasant and new and interesting. And removing it, you are going to get many less smokers finding the switch attractive. So I think, to me, flavors are a very important part of the whole thing, and they should certainly be maintained. The issue, if I understood correctly, Karl was talking about diplomacy and politics, and you don't want to make your product to look like you're drawing in new nicotine users who otherwise wouldn't be nicotine users. And so this is another consideration, and that is certainly a good point as well. So I think both of these factors need to be taken into account.
Yes?
I just want to mention, you never know what happens. For example, I met one of the leading medical doctors from Germany, and I was surprised he's using e-cigarettes now with watermelon taste. And he told me, Ernest, if you have told me this before 1 or 2 years, I would have said you are crazy, but I like this and I enjoy it. So, but I think we need some regulation on advertisement. So I'm somewhat anxious to see it on billboards, watermelon, take it. So, but it should be available, and the consumers should have the choice to use it.
Tomas?
Yes?
No, you first.
I'm Bengt Wiberg from Sweden, and I'd just like to focus on what Dr. Fagerstrom said. I have a theory. Those who want to ban flavors, aren't they actually talking about the packaging? We can see Russian and not only Russian, but strange producers of, for example, nicotine pouches with chickens, with Bambi bears, with Kalashnikovs, indicating this is a macho product. The first thing a non-nicotine user will see is the packaging. You can't see a flavor. You can sense it, but you can't see the flavor. So when people are talking about banning flavors, I think we should focus on how the flavors are displayed on the packages. Could I have some comment on that?
Yeah, it just occurred to me, Russia are trying to destabilizing a lot of things in the Western world, and here we have another example.
So, any comment? I think you are pointing at something very. I mean, the flavors can be there, but how are they visualized on the packaging? Please.
Yes, thank you. Rafik Asili from the Philippines. So I think the flavors can actually be a two-edged sword when it comes to vaping. Definitely, absolutely banning flavors would defeat the purpose of weaning current smokers from smoking cigarettes. But allowing flavors like watermelon, like ice cream, that might appeal too much to young people, and that might entice them to take up the hobby. So I think there has to be there has to be proper regulation which will limit the flavors to, as pointed out earlier, only flavors that will that current smokers will be motivated to give up smoking, something that they won't miss from smoking. So, but adding more flavors that can appeal to young people may be going beyond the limits, and may really push the issue to another extreme end. So. It has to be, I think, well defined which flavors should be allowed and which should be discouraged.
Thank you.
I might have a little comment to that. A two-edged sword is a good name. I actually developed the first nicotine pouch in the beginning of the 21st century. And I did so because I was at that time involved with developing nicotine replacement medications in the pharmaceutical industry. But nicotine, and particularly without strong flavors in the mouth, is irritating and burning, and compliance was therefore difficult, and to get new customers to start. So how can you improve on that? And then I thought that the mucosa under the upper lip is less sensitive to taste and possibly flavors. And so per unit in the product, you would have less side effects and less burning effects if you had it here. So now to flavor, how does this bridge to flavors? I think a cigarette, you inhale maybe 10-15 times of a cigarette, at least with every inhalation you have a kind of a flavoring experience. With e-cigarettes you might inhale even more, puffing more, and have more engagement with flavor. With snus, you put it in and it's there for around 30 minutes. What is important here, I think, is that when you open the can, there is this good smell. So I think smell is different from flavor. And then you put it up under your upper lip. And you might have a little bit of a flavoring sensation for a short period of time, but there is supposedly less impact of the flavor when you put something up here than when you have smoke going through the oral mucosa. So I think these products, nicotine pouches, flavoring wouldn't be so important as for the sales as it could be for e-cigarettes and maybe other heat but not turn products.
Okay, we have one question here.
Hi, I was just wanted to contribute to and add to what Karl had said there. It's very interesting to see with nicotine pouches, the most popular flavor in the US and Scandinavia is mint or mentha type flavors. And similarly with cigarettes, menthol and cloves are the only two flavors that have ever been widely successful in cigarettes. There seems to be something about the stimulating effect or the anesthetizing effect of these kind of flavors, because they have a trigeminal effect in the mouth that numbs slightly against the irritating effect of nicotine, and that might make the transition towards these products more acceptable if we look at not just mentha, but things like jalapeno pepper, things like cloves, these sort of trigeminal flavors, which also tend to be adult-orientated flavors as well, which sort of gets away from the allegations of attractiveness to children. So I'd like to see a wider range of those sort of things, which I think would make nicotine pouches more acceptable to adult smokers rather than simply oral tobacco users, as I think is currently the case.
Thank you. I have one question for you, Peter. And then when we talk about the different countries, how they act, and the lack of support from Public Health Institute, etc., regarding the shift from cigarettes and to move to safer nicotine products. But how come that UK is one of the few in the world where we actually have an official support for safer nicotine products?
It's a good question. I wish I could provide a clear answer. I guess the UK has got a more pragmatic approach. There's a long tradition of listening to science. The UK scientists were mostly brought up to speed by Mike Russell, who was thinking about these things, was very much in harm reduction terms. Maybe the ethos of tobacco control in other countries followed a different trajectory, where sort of feeling that this is a matter of morals and ethics, and that smokers are bad people who should be punished, more than this idea that you can actually remove the risk and allow people to do what they wish to do. Maybe that type of basic approach is different. I can speculate as well as you can, Tomas. It's an interesting open question. Karl may have some thoughts on that.
Karl?
Hooray for Michael Russell and his disciplines. He was really, I think, the main reason behind that we do see England behaving differently to the rest of Europe. And I also were happy to have the opportunity to have met him many times and sharing views. But he was very good in transforming his pathos for science and being close to the data. So that's why we have a good cadre of scientists in England. Thanks.
Rachel, do you have any thoughts on the UK situation?
Not specifically. I think we had some of the early science on putting the products on a spectrum come out from some UK scientists, and we had the public health quite early on in the debate declaring this 5%, 95% reduced risk of e-cigarettes compared with combustibles. So it may be that they came onto that data a little bit earlier, potentially before some of the anti-harm reduction efforts really got going.
Yeah, okay, but I have a question to all of you, and that's actually on the theme of dual use. And now I'm not thinking of dual use smoking and using a safer product, but actually poly-use between the safer nicotine products. Is that the problem, or is that something really good that can help a smoker transition faster? Do you see any? Is it good or bad?
I think it's okay if he chooses to do it, and if he uses pouches and e-cigarettes, why shouldn't he do it? And if he uses tobacco heaters and pouches, why not? The issue is if he's combining also with cigarettes, so we focus on getting people from the cigarettes, where we find also dual use. But also here, when I started working, we had this situation that the product information more or less outlawed the dual use. So if you took a nicotine gum, you had to quit immediately. And in our outpatient clinic, we had patients who had smoked 40 to 60 cigarettes, and then they used 5 to 10 nicotine gums and reduced to 20 cigarettes. And when you looked at the information, you should have said them, no, you stop this. You are not allowed to do it. So I think everything is a step in the right direction, which is changing the cigarette smoking. What do you think?
I get very angry when I hear anti-tobacco fanatics judging that a smoker that has been smoking for X number of years and now he all of a sudden starts to test an e-cigarette or something else and doesn't immediately give up smoking, then we have a bigger problem. He is a dual user. Before he was a single user, now he's a dual user. To me, that means now the smoker is on the right track, direction to give up smoking. But of course, as we know, all the reward that you have got from a cigarette from 40 years of smoking isn't there in any other tobacco product, as Peter so eloquently pointed out, that they're missing some reward from the e-cigarette, and the flavor is important. There are other things that can be important also. The price can be important. Information can be important. I can suffer from not having the full reinforcement if I know that this is much less harmful, etc., etc. But it's so sad to see that so many react so completely wrong when they see dual use. The only thing is that it doesn't go on for how too long, but I mean 2-3 months is quite normal, I think. Yeah.
I would just add to that as well. I think that it's a really positive thing that people who are trying to give up smoking have a lot of options in the reduced risk categories, so that even if they find that they don't get on well with one option, they can switch to others. So I think that poly-use in that sense could be a good way to try out the different options and to find the one that works the best for them and eventually get them away from cigarettes.
And Peter, any thoughts from your side?
Yes, I agree with what the other speaker said. It's definitely a move in the right direction. Part of it is how good these replacement products are. Once they get good enough, then smokers switch altogether. But the fact that they even try them, this means that they're on the right track, and maybe it's not good enough to replace smoking altogether, but it's already replacing part of smoking, so there would be harm reduction even from an incomplete switch. And they are still using that product, and the next flavor or an improved nicotine delivery comes along and they switch altogether. So it's definitely a good thing rather than a bad thing. If you see a smoker who's gradually switching or at least trying something else that should be encouraged rather than discouraged.
Thank you. Yes, we have a question here.
Hi, my name is Mohammed Isakar from Altria in the US. So I have one follow-up question from the discussion that we're having and then another question. The follow-up question to the panelists is, we talk about poly-tobacco use and possibly that could lead to a higher nicotine load for the user as opposed to a single use. And what's the panel's point of view, particularly because there's a lot of conversation around potential harmful effects of nicotine and would that lead to greater addiction and make it difficult for people to quit or transition to a single product?
Who would like to start?
I have simply not seen any data on the situation that you are painting for us, that someone starts to become a dual user. Does that mean a higher nicotine intake and higher dependence? I don't know. Do anyone else know of any data?
On the theoretical grounds, we know that smokers titrate their nicotine intake. When it gets above certain level, it becomes subversive. And I think if we did, we would probably find some data on nicotine levels in dual users compared to smokers. Some of them would show higher nicotine levels, but that could easily be because people who become dual users start as heavy nicotine users. So they had higher nicotine levels before. So there could be a methodology problem. My theoretical expectation would be that dual users are maintaining the level of nicotine they had before, only that they now getting part of that nicotine through a much less harmful product and less of it from cigarettes. So it wouldn't be a concern for me, but probably more data on it would be useful.
Well, may I add something? Sometimes we have the somewhat ridiculous thing that the smoker of 40+ cigarettes is afraid he gets addicted when using alternative products, and then in reality when you tell him you do not have to be afraid to get addicted, you already are, then he's angry with you. So I don't think this dual use is an issue if a smoker who has smoked a specific amount of cigarette, maybe 20+ cigarettes. Of course, if you're an occasional smoker, you shouldn't start with regular replacement all the day. If you smoke 5 to 10 cigarettes, then you might even be able to quit easily.
On this topic, I have one more question to the panel here. What do we know about long-term use of nicotine? Is that a problem at all, if it's in a safer form?
Yeah, the research we have that might apply to an answer to that question, that is from NRT, but NRT is not supposed to be used for a long period of time. And there are few studies. There was a study long ago called the American Lung Health Study, where the subjects were offered nicotine gum. I think it was just the 2 milligram, but they could use it for a very long period of time. And they were followed up for a couple of years, and there was nothing seen that showed that there should be any problem of more death or disease among the long-term users compared to those who stopped using it. The other set of data might then come from Sweden and snus. Snus contains a little bit more than nicotine, of course. The nitrosamines have been discussed for a long period of time, and it might be some other stuff also, but not necessarily heavy metals, for example. But under the GOTE-ATTEC quality standard, the harmful effects of snus in Sweden, and that's certainly long term, they are confined to the pregnancy, where no drugs should be used. I mean, prescription-free medicines should be avoided, alcohol should be avoided, and caffeine in large amounts should not be drank either, and nicotine avoided if possible. But among the non-pregnant ones, and usually men, what has been seen is that it doesn't increase the risk incidence of a myocardial infarction, but if you happen to get one, it might have some stronger serious consequences. The same for stroke. For cancer, it doesn't seem to increase the risk of cancer. Now and then there comes a study that gives a signal for cancer. For example, used to be suspected of pancreatic cancer, but further studies have shown no relationship with pancreatic cancer and snus. A more recent study showed that there might be an increased risk for rectal cancer. But again, let's wait and see if that holds up in coming studies or not. So long-term use of nicotine is probably close to long-term use of caffeine. It might also have some positive effects to compensate in the other end of the balance. And certainly much less harmful than alcohol to the drinker and to others around the drinker.
Thank you. Mohammed? Yep.
Just to follow up on that, what's the panel's opinion on the rhetoric that we have been seeing around the impact of nicotine on mental health issues? We see the Truth Initiative assertion that this is a depression stick, and nicotine enhances anxiety and stress.
So the question is about nicotine's effect on mental issues like anxiety and stress. Anyone would like to comment?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we see high consumption of nicotine usually in schizophrenics, for example, and there seem to be some effect to reduce side effects, but also the effects of medication. So the medication also gets increased, and sometimes it gets a cycle. So our, record smoker was schizophrenic, and he smoked 120 cigarettes per day, which was just possible because he was sleeping also 4 hours. So, he also didn't need something to light his cigarettes because he used the cigarette before to light the next one. So, and of course, as you can modify your mood or anxiety with nicotine, you might use it even if you are not, if you have no psychiatric disease. But of course, the mood of a psychiatric patient might be, how should I say in English, more modulating, and I guess people have learned to use it according their needs. Also, most of our psychiatrists say there is no fact in depression. We see a lot of smoking in depressive patients, so they seem to use it to some extent to modify their mood, and then you can discuss, is this good or bad? It's difficult or more difficult for them to quit, which is logical. And then we have to answer the question, is this good or bad? But because nicotine, as we heard from Karl before, and Peter might also agree, is relatively harmless, eventually even compared to some antidepressants which are available on the market. So the side effects are little if you're used to it, and if you are able to improve your mood. But of course, quitting is more difficult for them.
So just Peter, did you have any thoughts on the question?
Nicotine dependence is not a healthy mental state. Dependent smokers go through periods of withdrawal, which then they alleviate by smoking, and then they have another bit of feeling irritable and restless. So being dependent on nicotine may somewhat increase the overall level of stress you have. And there is some evidence that when people quit smoking, those who can quit have lower levels of stress sometime after. It's still possible that those who can't quit are ones who actually have positive benefit from smoking, and those who don't really need that as a coping mechanism find quitting easier. And there could be some other effects. But we're talking about smokers who already smoked anyway, so they do have that dependence in there. And if they then switch and become dependent on something else which is not killing them, that is definitely a plus. If you talk about people who are not nicotine users, whether it's better if they stay free of nicotine, then I would say yes, it's better if they do. But here we're talking about people who already are smokers. Now, possibly a side issue here, but that may trigger some other discussion, is how much nicotine, how addictive nicotine is when it's not combined with tobacco chemicals. And here we've got very strong claims from anti-vaping and anti-harm reduction lobbies about tremendous level of dependence potential in nicotine itself. But the evidence doesn't suggest that that's the case. People non-smokers don't get hooked on nicotine replacement treatment, and we have serious problems now trying to find non-smokers who become hooked on e-cigarettes. You get young people who never smoked and they experiment with e-cigarettes, but they very rarely become daily users, and we actually were trying to find some and couldn't. So it looks like you have to be a smoker to become long-term vapor. If you never smoked, you're not going to find these products that attractive. I'm not sure, it's probably not true for snus. I think there would be non-smokers who become long-term snus users, but these e-cigarettes in their current form, they don't seem to have much dependence potential for people who never smoke. But let's bring in another topic.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Bengt.
Bengt Tweedberg from Sweden again. Let me give you some background. In 2017, I had the luck of putting a question to the former FDA tobacco director, Mitch Seller, and I asked him, what's your thoughts about Swedish snus and the Swedish experience? And 4 times he said that FDA absolutely understands the Swedish experience of snus based on nationwide epidemiological evidence. Now, I come with a question to Rachel and Peter contra Karl and Tomas. What is your thoughts about government support? Obviously, in the UK, the government is supporting vaping and harm reduction, therefore. Whereas in Sweden, where we have reached the WHO target of 5% smokers, the Swedish government, no matter right or left, have never uttered a support that we can see in the UK for snus or nicotine pouches. So, can you elaborate on this?
The only thing I can say is that to hear something good about snus and nicotine pouches, I have to go to the UK to listen to presentations there.
I don't have a good answer to that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure why that is the difference between the communication on that. I guess what I mentioned before, maybe they took a stance a little bit earlier, but I'm not sure exactly why that was. Potentially due to the research that's happening in the UK, but then there's a lot in Sweden as well, so that doesn't really explain that. So yeah, I'm not sure. I'll look to Peter.
No, and I guess, Karl, that we both are upset with that our government are not proud of having achieved what they have achieved, and are out talking about it internationally. It's a shame, but that's politics.
Yes, we have reached the end game, but no one is saying hooray or hallelujah because it happened with the wrong means.
Yeah, I have a question down here. Yeah, sorry, Peter, did you want to comment?
No, just to say this is about ideology, not about science.
Yeah.
Hi, Martin Cullen with the Taxpayers Protection Alliance. I just want to point out, with regards to the UK, we're not strictly speaking doing harm reduction in the UK, we're doing vaping. Last week a report came out, an independent tobacco review, where they considered legalising snus and dismissed the idea. It also sort of really dismissed the idea of heated tobacco. Nicotine pouches are sold in supermarkets, but the government isn't really pushing those very hard. And this is amazing, a bit irritating to people who have far more problems than we have in the UK, but we're not actually doing harm reduction, we're just doing vaping. And people in the UK are trying to pressurise the government to embrace, like Rachel said, a wide, diverse range of nicotine products for smokers to choose. That's kind of what I want to say anyway.
I have a question, or a thought I've had. I know, Peter, historically, I mean, you are very anti-over-regulating things. But would it be good for the category if there was maybe one medicinal e-cigarette licensed? I mean, we all have the problem with media. I mean, in Sweden we have a medicinal oral pouch, NRT, but has that really helped the category?
I don't know, I don't think so.
No. So, Peter, do you think that a medicinal e-cigarette would benefit the whole wider category of consumer products?
Well, it may and may not. It could lead to just that one being recommended and approved, and the rest considered dangerous because it didn't get the approvals. The product would undoubtedly be obsolete and inefficient compared to others by the time it's licensed, because it takes years. And it's not necessary, it's not really needed. It's just consumers move on to something else and stop killing themselves with cigarettes, and you don't really need anything else than saying, fine, do what's good, what you think is good for your health. You know, stop killing yourself. It's highly irrational, the whole debate, the thing that anybody would try to stop smokers from moving on to doing something which is good for their health. It's a bit like only allowing building materials which has lots of asbestos in it and banning anything which removes asbestos. And we have a weird situation where cigarettes are fine, but tobacco control people are fighting against something which would actually implement what they proclaim that they want to see, which is to get rid of heart disease and lung disease and cancer caused by smoking. So it's all these background things are really to do with ideology, not science.
Maybe just to follow up on that, Peter, I know you are engaged in the gold standard of studies, the Cochrane review, and that are now a living document. And I mean, you have then different levels of certainty so how certain are we now regarding e-cigarettes and the efficacy?
Or smoking squid?
Yeah.
I think the Cochrane is saying moderate, but or whatever the phrase is, not yet full, But I think it concerns more the size of the effect rather than the direction of the effect. Because we have evidence from over 100 trials of nicotine replacement treatments that giving smokers nicotine help them quit, which is what e-cigarettes are doing. So you could add all that evidence to the few trials we have of nicotine replacement of e-cigarettes because they work on the same principle. And you could easily, upgrade the evidence because for NRT, I think it's now phrased in the strongest term, we don't need any more evidence, we already know that it helps. So I think it's strong. The same for snus. You just need to look at smoking rates in Sweden and you can see that snus replaces cigarettes on the population level. And that would happen worldwide if these alternative products, they don't even need official endorsement. They just need people to stop trying, smokers stop using them.
Karl, do you?
I have slightly another question directed to Rachel. And someone asked about the long-term effects of nicotine. And so I'm turning to Rachel. You did a very good study of risk of various nicotine-containing products published in F1000. Now, when people are getting onto these products and using them, are there any thoughts of doing another similar study to see more of the epidemiological effects of e-cigarettes and possibly nicotine pouches and whatever might come?
Yes, we're repeating the study, exactly the protocol that we did. At the moment, we're in the process of creating the update of that. So that should be due out this year. So that's going to update with the latest data using essentially the same methodology. Regarding the comment on nicotine, I think it would be useful also to note that I didn't raise my voice on that because actually nicotine isn't included as a carcinogen in our study simply because the IARC don't list it as a carcinogen. And the data sets that we used for validated toxins from the environmental agencies and from the regulatory agencies also don't list nicotine as a toxin, so it's not included in our study for that reason. So I think that can also sort of respond to that question on the long-term health effects of nicotine as well, as based on the science that we have at the moment.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Yeah, Rafi from the Philippines. I'd just like to go back, if I may, to the issue about dual users, because I think it's a very clinically relevant, real-world issue that we have to properly, adequately address. If I may just share our clinical experience with regards to dual usage. So we allow that in our particularly in our recalcitrant patients. But our observation in the clinic is that, if we just make it a free-willing dual user and we just allow the patients to smoke cigarettes again as they please, there is a very high risk of them sliding back to full-time cigarette smoking. So what we usually tell our patients and what we strongly recommend, although of course we don't want to impose a highly regimented smoking cessation protocol in our patients, but what we do recommend strongly is that on the first month we allow them to smoke up to 50% of what they used to smoke. In the second month we cut this down further to 50%, so that's about a fourth of what they used to smoke. And then by the third month, we tell them they should completely give up cigarette smoking and just use alternative tobacco products. We give them an extra month. That's all we give them. So, and we were getting reasonable success with this. It's not a very remarkable success. A lot of them still slide back, but it's much less if we we do not set timelines for them to give up cigarette smoking completely. Just an observation. I'd love to hear from the panel and from the rest of the audience if there are any clinical experiences on dual users.
Well, I fully agree with you. As long as you're using cigarette, it's easier to relapse completely because you used to use it, it's clear.
Yeah.
And interestingly, it's always the simple things which are the issue. For example, we had users of e-cigarettes, and they also relapse if the e-cigarette is damaged during weekend. Because, of course, you can buy cigarettes everywhere in Austria. You have these machines, these vending machines, but you do not get e-cigarette during weekend. So we recommend you that they have at least 2 e-cigarettes available at home. But I agree, of course, if you have dual use, you are closer to your cigarettes, you are used to inhaling it, and relapse is easier possible, yeah.
When I drink alcohol, I sometimes drink wine. Sometimes I want beer. It happens also that I want hard liquor now and then with the herring in the midsummer. And when I go to the coffee machine, I sometimes push on American coffee, sometimes on espresso. And so I'm certainly a dual user of alcohol and caffeine. The dual use with nicotine, that is new because there has been no other buttons on the machine than cigarettes. Now all of a sudden we have other buttons, and then we start to see that now I rather like this than that. And so we might enter into a new era where actually together we should have a heat button. No, let's see if I have it here, and no, this time we have an e-cigarette. But what do you want like this? And no one sees what I'm doing, and I'm on the train, etc. So you use various products for different situations that you like.
Probably that one observation it's different in a clinical setting where you have a small group trying to treat and try to help them, and what's happening on a population level. And we have this series of prevalent surveys of e-cigarette use in the UK, and over time we get fewer and fewer dual users. And initially the vast majority were dual users. People who use e-cigarettes were also smoking, and now it dipped under 50%. So most e-cigarette users are now exclusive e-cigarette users. And I think it shows a product improvement, that you're getting products with better nicotine delivery, less fiddly, better flavors, or whatever else it is, that is enabling people to switch altogether. So there's just a different perspective. As soon as these products will get good enough, they will replace it. So Karl's pushing the buttons. If one of them gives you a really very, very nice coffee and the others are rubbish coffee, you will go on pushing it.
Thank you. And we have a question here.
Yes, Glebs from Amplicon. I had a question to the panel. The nicotine products has different devices, and there are products that are single use. How does that affect dual using? Maybe if you're dedicated and bought an expensive device, you quit smoking faster, or you want to explore more, and maybe you will go to snus instead, because it's a single product and you can taste whatever you like. What do you think about that? The price of the devices you feel dedicated to use that then, because it will lie if you don't like it.
No, that you actually invest in a certain device, and it's a much higher upfront price. And I don't know. I know that you did some work on price, but that was more in relation to taxation.
Yes, and cigarettes, and we did some calculation, and we just focused it on cigarettes. which react inelastic, so to say. So if you increase the price in Austria now 1%, consumption goes down 0.6%. It would be interesting if we could move consumption to alternative products with the mechanism of price, and we're also considering doing some calculation here. But it's difficult because we have very little data on alternative products and how they react and how elastic they are. So, but I agree with you. I'm not sure if I understood your question correctly. So you said if I invest a lot in an e-cigarette, then I might be more successful. Was this the question?
Yeah.
It was maybe more open.
Well, but yeah. So, he's asking for a microphone maybe. So, you can help me here if I...
Yes, if I was a smoker, perhaps, if I wanted to taste something new, should I invest a lot of money in a different kind of product and buy a device?
Yeah.
And when I do that, if I like it, maybe I will quit smoking. But if I don't, I'll go back to smoking. But maybe if I try snus instead, that is maybe the same price or cheaper than cigarettes, could be a good alternative.
Well, I would recommend, I do not know if you are married, but if you tell it to your wife that you invest a lot of money in an e-cigarette, I'm sure you will try to change your behavior then. Because otherwise, if you come home we have this effect, we have some cessation programs in Austria which are quite expensive, and the methods are not very psychological or medical minded. But of course, if the patient, client, smoker tells his family that he will participate, I'm sure it can lead to a serious quit attempt afterwards. Because if you leave this office, you cannot go at home to your wife and lit the next cigarette. So maybe if you invest a lot, you have also some commitment to do something.
Thank you. And to the floor, we have one more question here.
Hello. It's actually more a comment to the previous speaker, is that I know that some companies which produce devices like electronic cigarettes or tobacco heating systems, they have some programs where you are thinking of switching. There is a period of time which you can take the device for free just to try for yourself and understand if it fits you, and only after that to invest and to buy the device for yourself, which I think can be kind of an intermediary level to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, one final question here.
Thank you. On the question for data on dual use, I don't have hard data, but I have empirical data, also often dismissed as anecdotes. One is my own, but I hear similar stories from lots of former smokers. When I started vaping, I decreased smoking in roughly a method that confirms the titration effect. And now, when I'm turning more to nicotine pouches, I find that I hardly vape anymore, but get my nicotine from the pouches. So, and this is an experience that I share with many others, and I think analyzing lots of anecdotes could help build a database for that. And another point, the dependence level of nicotine dependence. I still have a very high nicotine tolerance because I like the effects of nicotine, and I consume a lot of nicotine. But I noticed when I was a smoker after 1 hour, I would crawl the walls if I didn't get a cigarette. But now, when I can't vape or don't have any pouches with me, after 4 hours, well, I would like a good vape. Just like I would like a good cup of green tea. But it's not a craving like it was with cigarettes, even if my total nicotine intake hasn't changed at all.
No, thank you for a living example here. And I want just to give our panel an applaud and thank you for all comments and advice. And thank you very much. Thank you, Peter, for taking time. So I guess it's time for lunch now.
Yeah. Bye, Peter.
Bye.
Was a pity to not have you here.
Thank you.